Do not adjust your television. What you are about to experience is stranger than fiction.
Hey there, strangers, and welcome to Stranger Than Fiction. I'm your co-host, Devin.
Hello, I'm Heidi.
And today we are covering something strange in the neighborhood. If you missed our last episode, or the episode right before this, we were covering episode 1 of Stranger Things. And today we're going to be covering episode 2 of season 1. And this really builds on the last podcast that we did, because we really started to explore something called the Philadelphia experiment. And this really ties into why the Philadelphia experiment was part of the inspiration for Stranger Things. It's a long and wild ride. It only gets crazier. And we're going to go... We're going to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole and figure out the original title of Stranger Things and how it relates to something called the Montauk Project.
Oh, another project. All the projects.
Well, we had the Philadelphia experiment, and this is the Montauk Project.
All right.
Yeah. So you're going to have to strap in and kind of get your tinfoil hats ready, because it gets a little weird out there. But I'm very excited because I think some of the nuttiness is going to blow your brains out.
Cool.
Similar to Elle. So, without too much further ado, before Stranger Things 4 gets released, let's get into
Heidi's dissection.
Okay. Episode 2 of season 1 starts off with the three boys. Will's still gone.
Oh.
The three boys talking to Elle. Mike gives her some clothes to change into, because as we last saw her at the end of the episode, is she was in the rain in the woods. So they brought her over to Mike's house. He gives her a change of clothes to change into to dry off. And she just starts to take her clothes off right in front of the boys. And they're all 12 and they're like, whoa, they like freak out. And she doesn't understand, right?
No,
I'm
she's
sure
lived in a live-in science experiment.
Yeah, and I'm sure she's
life.
had to change in front of everyone,
Mostly it seems like she just wore a gown, like a nightgown.
A hospital gown.
Yeah.
So anyway, Mike leads her to the bathroom and he's like, you can change in here. And he goes to close the door and she's like, no.
No. Oh, so you can speak.
She says no. That's the first word she's said since they've had her. And he's like, okay, we don't have to, close the door all the way, but, leave it a little bit open, change behind it so we don't see you. So she does that and she's like, oh my God, she speaks. So Mike is really sweet and he builds her a fort made out of pillows and blankets in his basement. And
my parents literally had that same like comforter blanket.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so Mike builds her a fort and he asks her what her name is, because we don't know at this point that her name is Elle or 11.
Yeah. At this point.
Well, the boys don't know.
Do they? I don't remember if there was a flashback.
Yeah. But no, Bobby mentions it. Benny's Burgers. He asks her what, and she points to the tattoo.
11. What's that mean?
So anyway, she shows the three boys her tattoo with the number 11 on her wrist. And so he's like, oh, your name's 11. He's like, well, we'll call you Elle.
Yeah, because he's like,
my name is Michael. They call me Mike for short.
Yeah.
So your name's 11. We'll call you Elle for short. It's a really, really cute moment.
Well, my name's Mike, short for Michael. Maybe we can call you Elle, short for 11.
Now we cut to Joyce freaking out in her kitchen about making posters for Will. And Hopper shows up and he says he will go after Lonnie.
Lonnie is the dad, yeah.
I'm sorry, there was a typo in my handwriting.
What did you have, like Lenny?
It was like Lewanner.
Oh.
Hopper comes over and he's like, hey, I'll go after Lonnie, who's Will's dad, and see if Will is there. And Jonathan, Will's brother, is like, hey, how about I go to Lonnie? If Will sees cops, he's going to freak out. He's going to think he's in trouble. He's really good at hiding. Why don't I go instead? And Hopper says no. Yeah. He's like, cops are good at finding, so no.
He'll hide. He's good at hiding.
Yeah? Well, cops are good at finding, okay?
Okay. Then we focus on Mike eating breakfast really quickly, and he brings down some Eggos to Elle, which is where we get that famous, she gets obsessed with Eggos. It's so
That's
cute.
the start of it.
Yes. So he brings her some Eggos and tells her to sneak out of the house and ring the doorbell and say that she needs help, because he doesn't want his mom to know that
They
he's
were
keeping
out
someone.
last night.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
they were out last night, and that he's keeping her in the basement. He wants to, he still wants her to get help. So he's like, sneak out, go do this, ring the doorbell. My mom she'll know what to do.
Which
Even though
shows,
she's wearing Mike's clothes.
yeah, like the logic of 12-year-olds is like, yeah, we'll just have our parents help. And wouldn't they obviously put together, be like, why are you wearing my son's clothes if you just came up to my door?
No, it's fine. So Elle says no, and that she's hiding from bad guys who want to hurt her.
And is this also where they just...
Not yet.
Okay.
And so now we flash to the bad guys she'd mentioned listening in on Joyce's phone call to the police, where she discusses the phone call she had with Will was on the line when she heard, his voice, his breathing a little bit. And so they're listening in on that, and they're like, oh, it's an encounter. And so they go to track down Joyce's house. Hopper and the Popo are looking for Will in the woods. It's at night. I feel like they only look at night in the woods.
That's probably when like most people would be off work. They'd have the most manpower.
Yeah. And Hopper says that, they got to find Will, that Joyce is about to lose her mind. And the one other police officer, the darker skinned guy, says Joyce has already lost her mind. And he's like, no, don't say that. Like, that's not cool. And so the cop with the mustache.
He doesn't have a mustache yet.
Not yet? Okay.
Or if he does, it's infrequent.
He's guy with the glasses.
This episode, he definitely didn't have the creeper stash.
Anyway, he's like, Joyce and Hopper screwed, huh?
The chief and her, they screwed before, huh?
And yeah, it's pretty much confirmed that they used to have a thing.
Used to bang,
fling.
bang, bangity bang.
And so now we're at school with Nancy and Barb. I love Barb.
Do you?
I feel bad for Barb.
I will be honest, this may be an unpopular opinion. I don't understand. I remember when it came out, there was a strong attachment, let's say, to Barb. And I never understood it.
Okay. So Nancy and Barb are practicing flashcards for the test coming up. Mm-hmm. And Steve, I love his hair, he comes up with his douchey friends, and he says his parents are out of town and he wants her to come over and they're going to have a party. And, Barb is invited by proxy, right? So it'll be Steve, Nancy,
but I don't even think
Barb.
Really. Like, I think,
yeah.
Like, there was never even a proxy invite. It's just like, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, she's here too.
Yeah. And then Tommy is the douchey
I have
friend's
no
name.
idea.
And then Claire maybe is the girl's name. I don't know.
Those two are beyond me.
Yeah. I just hate them, so I just block them out of my memory.
Yeah.
And so, they're talking about this, and she's like, it's Tuesday night. What? And he's like, just do it. It's fine. And then they see Jonathan showing up, and he's putting up flyers on the poster board. And everyone's like, oh, does he even speak? And Nancy's like, I feel really bad. Like, we should say something to him. And, like, no one does. So Nancy goes over. Like, I'm surprised Barb didn't even go over. So Nancy goes over.
Barb she may not be in with the in crowd, but I think there's a part of her that does want to be a part of that, which is why she doesn't fall out of rank. And she is kind of maybe secretly happy to be invited to this party, even though she's a wet blanket.
So Nancy goes over to Jonathan, and she says that she's sorry about Will. And is Jonathan older than her or a high school dropout? I don't know.
I believe I think it's the same year as Steve. Steve's a year older, so I think they may both be seniors, but don't quote
But
me
Jonathan
on
doesn't
that.
go there.
Yeah, he does.
No, he doesn't.
Well, I guess we'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I think he's like a high school dropout. Like, he's dropped out to start working early, so he could.
I never
help
picked up
pay
on
rent.
that.
Yeah. Anyway, now we flashed to Dustin in school, and I put Dustin as adorable because he is adorable in this season. He's a cutie.
Oh no, I mean, even like seeing Finn Wolfhard, like so young.
I know. I'm like, oh, they're all adorable.
Yeah, like there was
happened?
something very captivating about these young actors, and I think some of them have definitely blossomed. Some of them not so much, but like, yeah, I think Dustin really steals quite a bit of scenes when he's in them in this season.
Oh, for sure. And so Dustin and Lucas notice that Mike is in school, and they're like, oh man, like he's always here by now. Like he must be in trouble for keeping Elle in his basement. And so Mike actually skipped school to take care of Elle. It was
Naughty.
really, really cute. And he doesn't even like fake being sick with his mom. He just straight up like pretends to leave and then comes back after his mom's left the house.
Yeah.
And so it's really cute. He introduces her to like the lazy boy chair, and he like pushes it back. He's like, "This is where my dad sleeps," and like she thinks it's fun. It's a really, really cute moment.
I love he's like playing with Yoda, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Not yet. That's way in the future.
Well, I'm just saying I liked when he played with Yoda.
Jonathan is driving over to Lonnie's. He decides to go anyway against Hopper's wishes, and he's playing Should I Stay or Should I Go on the radio, and he has a flashback thinking of Will when he showed Will that song, and Will really, really liked it.
And I think for the second time in like a second episode in a row, they do a really good job of character building with Will, because obviously with Will being, you know, the first episode called The Vanishing of Will Byers, Will is out of the picture, but they still do a good job building these relationships and these characters. And I loved the scene in Fort Byers, Castle Byers, in the first episode, and then this is equally good because it shows both the dynamics of the parents as well as the dynamics of the brothers and how that family unit works before we meet Lonnie.
So they're listening to that song, and Joyce is on the phone with Lonnie, and they're fighting, they're screaming, and Jonathan goes to turn up the music, and it's a really good bonding moment when Jonathan tells him, like, hey, like, it's okay that he's not coming, like, you don't even like to do what he likes to do, and he's like, oh, yeah, I kind of do, and he's like, you shouldn't like what other people tell you to like, you should only like what you like.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really good moment. And he's like, so do you like The Clash? And he like, do you honestly like it? And he's like, yeah, I do.
He's trying to force you to like normal things. And you shouldn't like things because people tell you you're supposed to. Okay? Especially not him.
I thought that was a really nice moment.
Yeah.
So then Joyce goes to the store where she works, and her boss is like, oh, I didn't think you were coming in. She's like, I'm not. I need to buy a phone, because as we know, her last phone got shockity-shocked. And so she didn't have any money. Story of my life.
She had money, but she gave it all to Jonathan to make copies.
Yes, of the flyers. And she's like, hey, I need an advance. And, you know, her boss is like, I can't give you an advance. And she's like,
well, no,
listen.
First he's like, okay. And he's like writing a check for like a week. And then she's like, I need 2 weeks advance. Like, she just kind of keeps upping the deal.
She's like, listen, my life is poop right now.
I've been working here for 10 years, worked all these
called
holidays, like, and like, as someone who's worked in the service industry, I don't even think you would have a boss that even would care as much as he did. But it was like, yeah, you would work someplace for 10 years, never call out, and work all these holidays, and a company still wouldn't care about you. So
well, I wouldn't want an advance, because then I'd be like, well, what's working this is for nothing, because I already got the money.
But you gotta save your son.
So anyway, she's like, I need 2 weeks, a pack of camels, and this phone. And she's very demanding about it. He's like, okay, here you go.
All right.
And so anyway, we flash to while, you know, Joyce is at the store, Jonathan's driving to Lonnie's. The men in white hazmat suits show up to Joyce's house, and they decide to check for activity, right? That's why they were listening to her call.
They got like Geiger counters.
There was like a spike. And so they find this goop in the shed where Will actually disappeared. Now we go back to Mike's house, and he's showing Elle. Oh, so he's showing Elle Yoda, and how he mentions like, oh, Yoda can move stuff with his mind. I think that's really important for later. And
I was on rewatch. I was expecting like she would do something.
No,
but
she didn't.
Yeah.
So then he shows her, you know, all of his trophies and his stuff. It's really cute. He's like going through stuff. We did this to each other. It's adorable. And then he shows her a pic of his friends, and she immediately recognizes Will, and she points to him, and she says, Will, and like, where would she have ever seen him? And she's like, Mike's like, oh my God, you know Will? And just at that moment, Mrs. Wheeler shows up at the house with Holly. She comes back home, and she hears footsteps because they were downstairs, and they run upstairs, and she's like, honey, are you home? Like, who's there? And Mike's like, oh, it's me.
I think my favorite, I think she says first, Ted?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would love if Ted just like played hooky himself. He's like, what I do? Why are you home?
What'd I do?
Yeah. That's something you would do.
Yeah.
And then Mike tells Elle, he's like, hide in my closet. I'm going to keep you safe. I just need to go deal with my mom real quick. And so she hides in this dark closet, and it starts to get to her. She starts freaking out because she's thinking of flashbacks of when she was in the facility and she was dragged to essentially like a solitary room.
It was like a copper room, I'm assuming, to like prevent psionic interference or her power.
But yeah, it was just like a tiny dark room.
It's like
with
a
no window.
closet.
Yeah, it's like, it's like the, what do they call it in prison?
Solitary confinement.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, so she has that flashback, and Mike lies to his mom and says he isn't feeling good, and last time that he, said he wasn't feeling good, she made him go to school anyway, so that's why he hid it from her. And she's like, okay, it's fine.
No, she has a really good mom moment. Like, you see a lot of times in, like, parenting or, like, I remember, like,
well, it's different
crappy
now that
shows
we're
like
parents, too.
Well, but I mean, like, I remember, like, crappy shows like Married with Children, where, like, you would have these family units where, like, everybody's just despicable and hates each other, but, like, this is, like, genuinely a mom who's like, you're going through a lot. Like, I understand, like, why you maybe wouldn't want to go to school, or, like, why, you would kind of hide this from me, but, like, I want you to feel like you can tell me these things.
And he's like, that's great. And then he goes and locks the door and goes to Elle.
Yeah, but it was a good parent moment. Mike reacting the way he would, it's not surprising.
So then Joyce hooks up her new phone and just sits there waiting for a phone call. She literally like pulls her comfy chair up closer to the phone. She's holding it in her lap and she's waiting presumably for Will to call her again. Now we switch over to Hopper. It looks like he's at a water hole or a quarry, like a really deep cliff that leads to like a quarry, I think it is.
Yeah, I believe it's the quarry.
And the other cop's like, I could totally jump in and survive this. Like that one guy did.
They talk about the drunkard.
He's like, that guy was full of shit. Like, he's like, if you fall from this height, that water is essentially concrete and you will die.
Yeah. And is that foreshadowing?
Mm-hmm.
So that's all we'll say.
So while he's there at the quarry, he gets a call about a murder at Benny's Burgers.
Yeah.
So sad because he actually knew Benny. And so now we flash to Jonathan. He goes to Lonnie's and a young girl answers the door. Not like super young, but like...
No, she was...
maybe like 30s.
Yeah.
And Lonnie's in his 40s or 50s.
I don't know. He's got that sexy salt and pepper hair.
Yeah, he's kind of cute. I give him that.
Yeah. I mean, he's a jerk,
I can see the appeal.
Oh.
And so he like scoots past her and he's like, where's Lonnie? And he's like looking around for Will. And then Lonnie comes up and like attacks him, pins him up against the wall, and Jonathan pushes him back and he's like, oh, you're strong. And he tries to hug Jonathan. And Jonathan's like, no, get off of me. I don't want to touch you.
Yeah.
They do a lot of bouncing around, so I'm sorry if it sounds really choppy. This is just literally scene by scene how the show goes. So then Mike tells Dustin and Lucas, they come over, it's after school apparently, they come over to Mike's house and he tells them that Elle knows Will. And Lucas freaks out and he's like, you know what, no, we're done, this is too scary. I'm gonna, you said bad men are coming after us. If we leave, we have to go tell an adult now. I'm gonna go tell your mom. And so he goes to open the door and the door slams. And he tries to open it again and it slams. And then they all turn over and look at Elle and she's got the nosebleed. And she was the one who moved it with her mind. She would not let him leave the room. It's a great reveal.
Which I guess in the first episode, the only thing that we know of her powers is she stops the fan. Which I guess you could see as possibly coincidental. But this really starts to prove a little bit more. We see more of the extent of her powers.
And when she uses her powers, her nose bleeds.
Yeah, so it does a good job of, again, just kind of revealing and building things throughout these episodes.
I would take nosebleeds if I could move things with my mind.
Even if it was just slamming a door.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So now Hopper is interviewing some guy who was a regular at Benny's. And he's like asking him all these questions about, was something unusual? And, he was like, no, I was just here, every day like I am, eating lunch with the boys. And he's like, well, actually, there was a boy trying to steal food. And he's like, well, he shows a picture of Will and he's like, oh, was it this kid? And he's like, no, that's Lonnie's kid.
Yeah.
don't think it was him. This boy had a shaved head, and Elle without hair, and she's not developed. She could pass as white.
And he even says about the same height, but different kid. And then like Hopper tries to push it. And what's fascinating is that is what humans do. Like we do start to second guess our memory, and then we start to say like, oh, I mean, maybe it was him. Like I guess it could have been. Like maybe I don't remember it as well.
I mean, could have been. Yeah, it could have been.
And so you start to get like a glint of hope from Hopper of like, maybe I've got a break in the lead. And obviously we know it's a very different child, but it is coincidental that one goes missing. A similar seemingly young boy around the same height also, appears in this location.
So now it's dinner time or right before dinner time, and Nancy's on the phone with Barb, and she's trying to convince her to go to Steve's party, and Barb agrees to go. And so she's at dinner, Nancy's at dinner, and she lies to her parents about her going to Will's stadium gathering thing.
There's going to be a memorial.
Yeah, something like that. And so she essentially, she's like, okay, you can go, which is stupid, but... And so Mrs. Wheeler's like, well, Nancy, if you're going, why don't you take the boys with you? And the boys and Nancy all shout no at the same time. Yeah. Obviously, all for different reasons. Nancy's going to Steve's party. The boys have Elle in the basement.
It's a good, like 80s sitcom moment of like, oh, no. And then, like, is it like right after that, like... You like hear, I think, a noise upstairs.
Yeah, and well, no, Elle comes walking down the stairs, and like Dustin kind of makes a face, and Mrs. Wheeler goes to turn around, and he like bangs his fists on the table to get her attention. And Holly starts crying, and you think it's because that like the loud noise scared her, but it's actually because she saw
there's
Elle.
There's a stranger walking around their house, and like poor little Holly's like, what is that person doing here?
Yeah, and Holly's the baby of the Wheelers.
Little 3-year-old.
Little 3-year-old cutie. So now we're back to Will's search in the woods, and the science teacher finds a Band-Aid.
Mr. Clark.
I love him. Leading towards the lab area where Elle was actually kept. So was the Band-Aid Elle's? Maybe. So Mike brings Elle food again. He's just constantly bringing her food. And he explains...
she probably didn't have lunch.
Yeah, and he explains to her what friends are and how they are friends, him and his friends, and how she's now one of their friends, and how they never break promises and don't lie. Very, very important things to note.
Well, and this becomes like almost a core principle for 11, and you really see she's a fascinating character, especially as the seasons grow, because in some ways she develops and thinks like a normal teenager, but in others, because of her isolated upbringing, she's kind of foreign to concepts and certain things, but she latches on to, obviously, with a lot of abandonment issues, the idea of friendship, of people she can rely on, and then ideas that she can hold on to like truths, because I'm sure there were a lot of lies that were happening in the facility, so it's promise to her like really becomes important.
Yes, and not lying. So now Barb and Nancy are driving to Steve's, and they park a few blocks away because Nancy's like, I don't want anyone to see me park in front of his driveway.
She's like worried the neighbors are gonna like see them.
And you mentioned that's something I would totally do, and you are 100% right.
And the neighbors wouldn't give at all a care.
Yeah, I know. So Barb says, why are we here? The only reason that Steve wants you here is so he can bang you. He wants to get in your pants.
Bangity bang.
And she's like, no, that's not true. And she's like, yeah, it is. Like, he invited you to his house. His parents aren't home.
There's going to be drinking.
There's going to be drinking. Like, he wants
very
to
small group of people, 2 of which are already
banging constantly.
Yeah.
And you guys are dry humping in the bathroom. Like, it's going to happen. She's like, no, it's not. You'll be my guardian angel.
Does she say that?
You can be like my guardian, all right? Make sure I don't get drunk and do anything stupid.
Yeah, she's like, you'll be my guardian.
Blah.
I know. And Barb, the virginity Barbie. So anyway, it now flashes to Hopper sleeping with some rando.
Yeah, I still am scratching my head. Like, all of a sudden, they go to his bed. He's with this young woman, and they don't address who she is, where he's met her. Like, I mean, obviously, it's, he's been divorced from his wife, and clearly, he has some relationships. But they don't even go into who this woman is.
No, I think it was honestly just some rando he picked up at the bar.
Probably. But what I really love, and and this doesn't spoil too much, but Hopper really focuses this idea of being cursed.
You ever feel cursed?
And we talked a little bit about, some of the symbolism in the first episode and some of that feeling of that curse. And we really hear Hopper talking about that. But this idea of being cursed it continues to haunt him into further seasons. And I didn't realize how far back it went until we were rewatching it.
So now we're back at Mike's house, and Elle, they're like, okay, so where's Will? You know who he is. Where can we find him? And Elle grabs the D&D board and shows them. She actually picks Will's character, who's the wizard.
Of course.
Which I think is very smart that she knew that. And they're like, oh, her psychic powers. And she flips the board upside down. And she puts Will on it, and she goes, he's here. And they're like, well, that doesn't make sense.
But I love that the back of the board was black.
Yes.
It's a wonderful little prop detail. And I didn't remember where it got the name The Upside Down. And I think it more is the conversation with Mr. Clark. But it's very clever that they literally turn the board upside down. She doesn't really explain anything. She just puts Will's piece on this black board. And that's it.
And then she says hiding.
Yeah.
And they're like, hiding from what? And then she grabs the monster piece, the Demogorgon piece, and puts it on. And so they're like, oh my God, like he's hiding from this big monster. So the Demogorgon is the name. So now Jonathan goes looking for Mike, and in the woods, or not Mike, Will.
I was
sorry.
like, what?
I always do that. So Jonathan's looking for Will in the woods, and he's taking photos of evidence, right? And it's at night.
They're acting like it's like crime scene photos. It's kind of
creeper.
I mean, all of it just seems a little weird. I guess I know why they had him there, because they need him to be further down the line, but it just doesn't really make sense that this teenage boy would be like taking photos of the wood with a crummy camera.
So then he hears a girl screaming, and he's like, oh God, let me go help this person. So he runs toward the screaming sound, and he sees Steve's backyard, and it's just Steve's friend screaming about almost being thrown in the pool. And so Nancy and Steve start shotgunning beers. And they give one to Barb. They're like, Barb, you can do it. So, she's given into peer pressure. Her best friend's doing it. Everyone's doing it.
Well, yeah, because if you're not totally familiar with shotgun into beer, what you do is you have to pierce the can and then
in the bottom
and then chug it. And so they were using some sort of knife to pierce and do the shotgunning.
And so Barb goes to cut the beer can open, and she gouges it into her hand, like by her thumb. Like it's a bad, deep cut, and it is gushing blood. And she's like, let me just go wash my hands. It's going to be fine. And then all of them get pushed in the pool while Barb is washing her hands. And Jonathan is still taking pictures of this all, of them like in the pool.
Yeah,
what the fuck?
It's really not okay. And I feel like, they have this wonderful moment where he's like a great big brother earlier.
And now he's a total creep.
He's a real big creep. Like I don't know what his thoughts are. I mean,
you can watch from afar and see what's going on.
No,
you don't need to take pictures.
You're a peeping Tom.
Tommy, how's the peeping? Tommy, how's the peeping?
You're. I don't know.
He's photographing peeping Tom. Anyway, so now we're back to Joyce, and Joyce's phone finally rings. So she's literally been sitting there from like maybe noon until like 7-8 o'clock at night.
Ding,
so
dong,
her
ding,
phone
dong,
rings.
ding, dong,
she answers it.
Banana phone.
And
ping pong, ping pong, ping pong, ping. Banana phone.
She hears the creepy noises. And she can hear Will breathing again. She's like, Will, is that you? And he says, Mom.
Yeah.
And she hears it loud and clear. And she's like, oh my God. And then the phone, of course, explodes again. She gets electrocuted.
Zaps.
And so it dies out, and she's like, no. And then I watching this as a parent, though, like, I really get her, like, desperation, and, like, I would be, like, you think Joyce is bad in this? I would be 10 times as bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount where it's like, oh, is Winona kind of hamming it up or being a little hysterical? And
no.
And I think that's impossible to imagine unless you are or have been a parent, and that fear is just overwhelming, and it shuts you down. And there's moments when, even with Jonathan, when he's like, I need you to like kind of keep it together because you're just like, you're just not. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she is just gone. And so she's hanging on to these kind of what seem like delusions, which I think further add to, this is such a strange science fiction show that seems so unbelievable. And part of that comes from the fact that like Winona herself seems unreliable as a character, as a narrator. Yeah.
So anyway, so she's like freaking out because her phone just blew up, and she's like, no. And then she noticed that the lights in her house are flickering, and she's like, what the hell? And so she like follows it, and like the lights progress, and they lead to Will's room.
No, Jonathan's with the speakers, because it starts playing The Clash.
Oh, I thought that was Will's room.
I don't think Will would have those nice speakers.
Okay, well, whoever's room it is, one of her kids.
Yeah. They may share a bedroom. I'm not really sure.
And Should I Stay or Should I Go comes on, blasting. And the light in Will's room is super, super bright. Like, it just turns brighter and brighter and brighter. And she's like, oh my God, what is happening? If that was happening to me, I'd be freaking the fuck out.
Yeah.
Then something starts coming out of the wall, and we don't really know if it's like the creature or if it's Will trying to get out, because it looks like multiple limbs trying to claw out.
So I'd be curious, especially those who have seen all of or what's been released of season 4 and kind of through, slight spoilers to those who haven't seen season 1. It could be the Demogorgon. I think based on later happenings in this episode, the Demogorgon is over near Steve's house. So I feel like this is Will trying to push through the Upside Down, but he obviously can't.
Or there could be multiple Demogorgons.
It could be, but I feel like mostly in this season we only deal with one creature. So it's hard to say. I'm curious what others think. I think personally it's Will trying to get through. Like that he's realizing he has an impact on this other world, and then therefore he's trying to then cross that barrier.
So Joyce freaks out, understandably.
Yeah.
And she goes to her car to drive away because all the music goes off after that happened. And she gets in her car and she's about to drive away, but then the song comes back on and the lights come back on. And she's like, Will is there. That's my baby. I have to go back in. So she goes back in. Nancy goes upstairs to change in Steve's room. So she's about to go up because she fell in the pool.
At what point does Barb creepily... No. Was it in the car where Barb's like, is that a new bra?
Yeah.
Is that a new bra?
Now, I'm not a female. I've never owned a bra. But has any of your friends ever known your bras well enough to know when you have a new one?
No. Sorry, I had to think about that. So anyway, Nancy's about to go upstairs to change because she's all wet, and Barb's like, where are you going? Like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm just going to go up to Steve's room and change. Like, I got to change. And she's like, Nancy, like, you're going to go bang him.
We gotta
told
go.
Me not to. We should leave. And Nancy's like, oh, yeah, you should go. Like, I'll get a ride home.
Mm-hmm.
And so Barb leaves. And Nancy goes upstairs, and Steve gives her some clothes, and she tells him to turn around. This is my favorite part. She goes, turn around. And so he turns around. She takes off her shirt, and then she says, okay, you can look. So Steve's like, dang, Heidi in my room with her shirt off. So then they start making out, of course, and Jonathan is
still creeping.
He's still taking photos. He's taking photos of Nancy in her bra in the window, like before she's about to kiss Steve. What the fuck? Not okay. So Barb doesn't leave. She decides to go sit in on the diving board by the pool.
Which I love the lighting and I love the steam. Like, I don't know why you would have a pool out and available in November. I don't really care because
because they're rich.
I guess. But I love that steam coming off it. It's very eerie. It's very, like, classic Universal monster of kind of like fog in the forest. Like, it's great.
Yes, and it's October, by the way. But yeah.
No, it's November 4th.
Oh, just kidding. So Barb's sitting on the pool, and her cut, it bleeds through, and some blood goes into the pool.
But she's like squeezing it out too, which really gave me the willies. Like I didn't
see her squeezing. I thought she was just like holding it. And
then it was just I thought she was kind of like squeezing it. Okay, then it's like oozing out because you need to get stitches.
Yes, and it's not going to matter in a minute.
Whoa.
So the blood goes into the pool, and the lights in the pool go out. It's really good. It's quiet. It's like eerily quiet. And she's like, kind of looks around like, what? And of course, the monster, the Demogorgon, is above her, and it grabs her. Dun dun dun.
And then she's just gone.
And then she's just gone. And then the lights, everything come back on like normal. It's a great moment. And while that's happening, Steve and Nancy are about to do it. The lights turn back on, and the end.
Yeah. So just a good, another character has vanished, similar to Will, is just kind of disappeared. And you're like, what is this thing? I think at this point we can safely say, like, the monster is not 11, that there is a monster, that Will is hiding from it, and we're not sure, is it entirely in this world?
Oh, and they show it too. It's like a
half
weird,
a second
flowery face, but not the flowers in a good way.
But it's got like a petal mouth, like 5 petals, but you don't really get a good glimpse at it. It continues to do the Spielberg, mastery of, let's show as little as possible of this monster because we're going to have a bigger reveal later. But
one of my friends who is gay told me that he thinks that that's what a vagina looks like.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how many secret government facilities would you give this episode?
9.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was a really good episode.
I'll give it 8.5. Just to be different. Just because I like to be half a building. They haven't finished that building.
They haven't finished the construction. Only half of it's operational.
51.5.
See, I picture half of a building literally chopped in half. So there's like exposed wires on the side, but the other half is like. Fun.
Oh, not like halfway built vertically, like halfway horizontal.
Like they cut it like a cake.
All right. No, a very solid episode. It continues to do a lot of the same right things. I think it drags a little bit.
Did you?
I do. Rewatching it again, I kind of wanted to jump a little bit quicker into some of it, but I think a slow build is necessary and good. And overall, it's just a very solid show and continues to be so.
Yes.
All right, so let's move on to Behind the Screams. So as I mentioned earlier, and in our last episode, as with all of these, this was dropped July 16th, 2016. So Netflix, in his infinite wisdom, just says, let's release them all.
We were engaged.
Yes.
I thought the world should know.
So, starting with Lonnie Byers, he's played by Ross Partridge. He also played, his character was named Curious Man in The Lost World Jurassic Park.
What?
So I
gotta go back and look for Curious Man.
I gotta find Lonnie of 1997 and find, like, I don't know if he has a line. I don't know, but I really enjoyed that.
Curious Man.
I want to know, like, is he in, like, San Diego? I wonder if he's almost like the dad. Remember when the dog gets eaten? Like, maybe that's the Curious Man?
I think it would just be father.
I don't know. But, yeah, good old Ross Partridge was playing important characters. Just like episode 1, this episode was written and directed by the Duffer Brothers. Honestly, this was not the first thing they did, but it's kind of fascinating that, like, they didn't have a whole lot of credits to their name, and then they did this, and then, have just kind of blown up because of it.
Well, what did they do before this?
I honestly, it was a bunch of smaller, I believe, horror projects. Nothing, nothing that if I said it, you'd be like, oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But fascinating, they are identical twins.
What? Me
and
too.
They work as a unit, like, there are some other siblings that do that as well. But
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm not identical
you
twin.
are not.
I don't know why
I was
said
like,
that.
you're just lying. Elle would be really upset.
Promise.
So just like in E.T., there is, this connection between E.T. and Elliot. And so this whole episode is really about Eleven and Mike in that similar where there's that good moment.
Alien.
Yeah. And so this episode is literally called The Weirdo on Maple Street. I don't know if Mike lives on Maple Street.
We live on Maple Street.
I was gonna say what was
Literally.
what was always really weird is I grew up on Maple Street, and so I'm like, was I the weirdo on Maple Street?
Absolutely.
Yeah, oh yeah. And so you have, in E.T., you have Elliot, who pretends to be sick, and he stays home from school so he can show E.T. around.
And he shoves E.T. in the closet.
I'm getting there.
Sorry.
So he shows E.T. his toys, including a Star Wars figure.
Han Solo?
I don't remember who he shows, but then you see Yoda. E.T. later sees, remember when it's Halloween, he sees like someone dressed up as Yoda, and he's like, oh. And then did you know they actually put E.T.'s species in the Senate in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace? It's like little, like in the background,
No.
E.T.'s species is one of the delegates in the Senate.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'll if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll have a
E.T.'s
little
in Star
picture.
Wars, guys, it's all real.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of the, because Spielberg had Yoda, this was kind of like returning that favor or that like little wink and nod.
I love it.
Yeah. And then also when as you mentioned, she gets put in the closet in the same way that E.T. kind of gets trapped in the closet. Obviously, there's
in Drew Barrymore's closet, like amongst all the stuffed animals.
Yeah, and it's a little bit different reaction that goes on, but similar of kind of frantically like just go in there and don't move. Don't make any noise.
I had a lot of stuffed animals growing up, and I always thought that maybe an alien was hiding in them.
But you didn't hide the alien. You just thought like somewhere
there was just an alien hiding in my stuffed animals.
Snuck in and like buried himself under the pile. Was like, they'll never notice me here.
I feel like Juju would do that. Our cat would just like, if we have a bunch of stuffed animals, I
Just,
can
like,
see her like
creep.
amongst them.
So the song "Should I Stay or Should I Go" is the Duffer Brothers have really said that a lot of characters, if not all characters, really have a song that's emblematic of them, and this is very much Will Byers' song. You get, there's a lot of multi-textual meanings to that song. You have should he literally stay or go in the Upside Down. You get a lot of family drama where he's kind of uncertain and living in this between. There's something to be said possibly about his sexuality and kind of wafting between how his comfort further on. I mean, they talk about that in the first episode where Lonnie has a very disparaging remark in regarding Will's sexuality, and that's explored a little bit later without giving too much away. But this idea of Will not really sure where he fits in, it's a great song choice for him, but it was actually really hard to get the rights to the song. Really? Nora Felder was the show's music supervisor, and initially when she tried to get permission for the song, she went to the rights holder. I'm not sure if it was The Clash specifically or
Hello, The Clash. I'd like to use your song, please. Thank you.
It was probably, the musical producers or, whatever studio owns it. But
I'm not sure how that works.
So she went and was like, hey, we want to use this in our new show. And they thought it was a joke because it was described, or they were like, it's this show about monsters from an alternative world. Like, no. Like,
yes.
Well, they thought that sounded absolutely silly and they didn't want to release the rights to that. And so they had to convince them, and Felder actually presented a lot of scenes where the song would be used. Okay. So they got an idea of, no, this is actually, a very important moment between two brothers. It's emblematic of this character. Like, it's very important, and therefore they obviously got the song for that.
I wonder what their backup was.
I think in some of those situations you don't have a backup. Like you're just like,
we get it or we don't.
We have to have this. Like this is important.
Spare no expense.
So Lucas speculates that 11 is a psycho escapee. Dustin says like Michael Myers. Obviously, this is a reference to our favorite Halloween, 1978, which we've done an episode on if you want to check that out.
Yes, it's good.
The title itself, The Weirdo on Maple Street, is actually a reference to...
me.
The Twilight Zone. Do you know the episode The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street?
Remind me.
So in it, all of a sudden, a bunch of electronic machinery goes off and everybody kind of comes out onto the streets and they start freaking out because they're like, why did all our cars, our homes, all our appliances, they all turned off? And so they all start then turning against each other. And essentially it's an allegory of
I do remember
communism
this.
and the Red Scare. And it's one of my favorite episodes. It's a phenomenal episode, but it's this is obviously, a hint towards that. The weirdo in this case, does have some powers over technology, and you also get references to strange things turning on appliances.
Is Elle the weirdo in this case?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's not Will, it's not Mike.
I mean,
But you also have, this combative uncertainty among the friends where they're not really sure like what to do with Elle. So you also have that extra meeting as well.
Mm-hmm.
So all really good stuff there.
Yeah. I mean, these episodes are extremely clever and well written.
Yeah. And another, like we talked about, this does a great job referencing a lot of Spielberg works or giving homages, however you want to put it, stealing from. So we have E.T. that we talked a lot about, and then last episode we talked about how there was a Jaws poster, and then you have the Blood in the Water that attracts this series monster. No. No, a different monstrous, facial monstrosity.
Side note about sharks. So, sorry, I'm going to get a little marine biologist on you.
No.
So, sharks are actually super important because, yes, they can smell blood from very, very far away. But the reason for that is they're like the vacuum cleaners of the ocean. So, they will eat all of the injured fish. So, they actually help keep the ocean clean.
They'll also eat Louisiana license plates.
Yes.
So, let's move on to
the truth.
Much as you try to bury it, the truth is out there.
So we're gonna start again with what is definitely factual, and then we'll go to what is a little bit more questionable. So
Cool.
In 1984, there was a movie released called The Philadelphia Experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was plotting out, potential episodes that we could do, I was going to have us watch The Philadelphia Experiment, and then we would talk about the more real-world inspiration. But I felt with Stranger Things, I had to address that to get to some of the meat of it.
Okay.
So a man named Al Bielek saw the movie in 1988, so 4 years after it had been released, and he claimed he experienced an overwhelming sense of deja vu when he watched it.
That's weird.
And I don't know what this means, but using New Age therapies and practices...
Witchcraft!
Maybe hypnosis, I'm not really
Reiki.
sure. Possibly. Bielek was able to unlock a massive store of repressed memories about his extensive involvement in not just the Philadelphia Experiment, but also in something called Project Montauk, or the Montauk Project.
Okay.
So pretty much he believed his memory had been wiped by the CIA, specifically Project MK Ultra. And I don't want to get too far into that, but there are a lot of questionable government things, and that is more based on fact. Now, did I think that they probably took this individual and did some of that mind wiping or memory erasing? That remains to be seen, but he does, or he did.
Mm-hmm.
So Bielek claimed that his actual real name was Edward Cameron, and that he and his brother Duncan were crew members on the USS Elridge in 1943 when they were in their 20s. So if you remember from our last episode, the USS Elridge was the one who was a part of that transport that happened on the alleged Philadelphia Experiment.
Yeah, I remember that.
Was transported through time and space, and apparently people got stuck in the hall, yada, yada, yada. So he saw this movie, did this therapy, and realized through this that he had a brother and that they were both members on this ship and allegedly survived this experiment, but don't remember it to this day because the CIA wiped their brains. In 1990, Bielek told his story to an audience at the Mutual UFO Network conference, and he claimed that not only was the Philadelphia Experiment real, but also that he and his brother were aboard the ship when it happened. He claimed that Nikola Tesla engineered the equipment that caused the Elridge to slide through space-time and also opened up a wormhole to the future, which dropped the brothers off in the middle of Montauk's Camp Hero, August 12th, 1983. So that's why I talked a lot about Nikola Tesla last time, because one of the things that was believed that either he helped create those generators or that process of this time slip. And we'll get a little bit more into it later, others believe that his death may have been faked and that he continued to be a part of this Montauk Project.
Secret society.
So we got to talk a little about what Montauk is and where it came from. So if you're not familiar with the United States, or even if you are, you may not be aware, in the eastern tip of Long Island, New York, there is what's called the South Fork, and it stands with this famous Montauk Lighthouse Point. So Montauk is a particular location that's in Long Island in New York. And this lighthouse was first commissioned by George Washington in 1987, so it goes way back. And the beaches and the land on which the lighthouse is located are all a part of what's called Montauk Point State Park. Okay. It's a popular tourist attraction during the summer months. However, the military actually occupied Montauk Point all the way back in World War I, and the area pretty much had been occupied by the Army under the name Camp Hero or Fort Hero. So
where is this again?
This is in New York.
Okay.
Long Island.
Yeah, okay.
So during World War II, the point was equipped with huge cannon-like guns that were mounted on turrets because there was this belief that Hitler's forces, they would essentially be coming across the Atlantic, and that would be one of the first points that they could land on. Mm-hmm. So they had this base believing that if there was an attack coming from the Atlantic,
they would defend it.
Yes, that they would be kind of ready. You know, they'd be probably going for New York City, and that they would have to really hit Long Island first, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And you can still see the remains of these turrets on the premises today. There's a lot of outcroppings of land, and you can really see like camouflaged concrete buildings.
Interesting.
And that's all real. So it really was a military operation. You can still visit this state park today. There are still remnants of whatever was going on there.
Okay.
So the whole area is... And this is where it starts to get a little dicey, so believe what you will. But it is said that this whole operation was built up and it was allowed to be covered with overgrowth in order to conceal a network of underground bunkers connected possibly by miles of tunnels. And the base itself was supposedly built to look like a civilian neighborhood so that enemy aircrafts would have a hard time identifying that base from the air. Not so sure how much of that is true. Some of it could be.
Yeah, I mean, underground bunkers totally could be a thing.
And it would make sense that you would obviously have some overgrowth and you would not necessarily want your base to look like a base from overhead. So that could be true. So during World War II, the entire area was closed off to civilian traffic, but after the war, a lot of those restrictions relaxed, and it led to the establishment of this park area and the surrounding Montauk Lighthouse.
Okay.
So as for the base, during the 50s and the 60s, the facility was changing hands. It moved from the Army to the Air Force, and the building served as a transmitting tower for what's called a SAGE or a SAGE radar system. So you'll see, and I'll have a picture if you're watching this on YouTube, maybe we'll post on Instagram some pictures. There's this giant radar structure that kind of, they say it looks like a banana or a banana peel. It's this 90-foot giant radar. And part of where some of the urban legends, especially that happened in the 80s, is this radar would be kind of moving around and locals would complain of radio interference, channels changing, all sorts of like strange things happening. So you had a lot of like mystery of like, well, what the heck are they doing in there? My television, my radio are getting screwed up. There's this giant, strange radar going on. So what's up with that?
Okay.
So the base officially closed down January 31st, 1981. It was declared obsolete and defunct and pretty much lay abandoned for years. That's the military story is, hey, we closed this down.
Okay.
So the ownership was turned over to the General Services Administration. In 1984, the land was donated by the federal government to the state of New York, and that's when it became Montauk Point State Park.
Okay.
Now, the question is, what happened between 1981 and 1984?
I don't know.
So back in 1990 at that Mutual UFO Network conference, this is where a man by the name of Preston Nichols also presented with that Al Balak.
Did they present together or separate?
Together.
Okay.
So
how did they meet?
I don't know if they met through this conference or Mutual UFO friends.
People.
Yeah. But Nichols was a microwave engineer who supposedly lost his job.
A microwave engineer?
A microwave engineer.
I'm sorry, it just seems silly. Like, I know it's not, but like... I make microwaves.
I don't know if he made microwave or necessarily was a specialist in microwaves in the...
Microtechnology.
No, like X-rays, microwaves, all
I know,
that.
I'm being a jerk.
Yes. So he lost his job at AIL, which is an electronics defense contractor. So whatever they were doing...
So he was making microwaves for defense?
He was probably using microwave technology potentially as an offensive weapon.
Jesus. I will blow you up. 30 seconds on high.
I mean, have you seen Batman Begins? It's literally Ra's al Ghul using a microwave emitter to cause chaos in the city. So maybe that's what they were going to do.
They saw that movie and they had inspiration.
They were like, we'll make a desert out of our enemies with our microwave emitter. I don't know. So when he was laid off or he lost his job, then he started remembering glimpses of a, quote, alter ego existence, which he believed he was living, where he thought his technical expertise was being used to maintain the Montauk Air Force radar base.
Okay.
So his belief was Montauk Point had not been shut down. It had not been taken away or relinquished from military control, and that he believed that he was being made to believe that his day job was this microwave engineer, but in actuality, he was this secret scientist who was doing, whatever experiments were happening at Montauk.
Okay.
So in the 1970s and 80s, Nichols was the leader of the psychotronics movement. He claimed that government agents were using electromagnetic radiation to transmit ideas directly into people's heads. His followers, some of whom still wear solid metal pots on their heads to block microwaves, claim that Nichols was able to control the weather and thus prove the government had similar capabilities.
Is that why we were told not to stand in front of the microwave when we were kids?
This is where you get the idea of tinfoil hats, about people thinking that metal is going to block these microwave transmissions comes from Nichols and some of his more interesting ideas about what the government was doing. So he claims that he was teleported to Montauk in 1968. It says he worked on Camp Hero's semi-automatic ground environment, that SAGE radio tower that we were talking about. In 1992, he published the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, detailing all these wild experiments done at Montauk. After the book's publication, others started coming forward to say they too had also been privy to the illicit research conducted there. But the question is, what exactly was going on?
I don't know.
Well,
they're making microwaves.
That's where we're going to leave it.
Okay, bye.
Well, listen, if I went into the whole nonsense, this is why it's taking multiple episodes, is we have to kind of peel the onion bit by bit and slowly go down the rabbit hole, because we're going to find where the idea of children being experimented on.
Nope. Gonna make me upset.
Where the idea of a particular chair and certain psionic or telepathic or telekinetic experiments were happening, and maybe even a monster.
Like Indiana Jones.
What? There were no monsters in Indiana Jones?
No, I'm talking about the Crystal Skull.
What? No. What? What? Those were aliens.
Aliens.
So, of what I presented to you, you have, on one hand, you have one individual who claims he was on the Philadelphia experiment and that he had his mind wiped and that he was a part of this secret experiment and that he was transported through time. On the other hand, you have another individual that meets him at a UFO conference and believes that he had his mind changed. So Men in Blacked. So he was working, or believed he was working, one day job when in actuality he was doing secret experiments.
Don't quit your day job.
Do you believe either?
I need more evidence.
Okay. And I do want to say it's easy to say, especially when you have essentially the inventor of tinfoil hats, but there is a history of the U.S. government doing really shady experiments on people and lying about it and covering up. If you go back to the 1930s, you had the Tuskegee experiments where they were testing syphilis on black individuals, and they did not tell them, obviously, that they were giving them this disease. And
Are
then
you
we're,
serious?
yeah, the Tuskegee experiments were totally real, and they monitored these individuals for years to see what the outcome of syphilis was.
I'm disgusted.
The U.S. government's pretty disgusting.
Yeah, fuck the Supreme Court.
And you also have the, as I mentioned earlier, MK Ultra, which was the CIA testing all sorts of hallucinogenics, where they were trying to test LSD to see if they could mind control people or do a lot of stuff with illicit substances and see if they could convince people to do things under duress or under some sort of influence. And those are both very real and were covered up, and some parts have been declassified, but it's not outrageous to think that the government could be doing things.
Oh, no. I believe that for sure.
So I do want to kind of say, like, is there a possibility that there are experiments happening in places that we don't know? Yes.
100% yes.
Now, do I think that time travel and the Philadelphia experiment and even possibly what things may have happened in the Montauk Project? I don't know. But we'll get a little bit further. But as I mentioned, the original title for Stranger Things was going to be Montauk. And obviously that's because it was inspired by the events of these projects. And if you join us next time is going to be our 20th episode. So we're going to do like we did with our 10th episode, where we're going to do a top 10, but then we'll get back to Stranger Things.
Yes.
So that's something exciting. I think we're going to do top 10 movies that scared us as adults.
Ooh.
And we'll then rejoin with more Stranger Things episodes. But if you want to kind of follow along with some behind-the-scenes stuff, we do have a Patreon that goes over what we're doing on both Channeling Spirits, our YouTube channels, as well as our podcast here. It's a great way to support us and help us get this content out a little bit quicker, because we'd love to do this as our day job.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much for joining us. I hope you're enjoying as we go down this rabbit hole. I'm not trying to bait anyone. It continues to get weirder. I hope you're enjoying some of the weird path, but just stay tuned until we get to the monster at the end of the book, because it's a little wild.
And to those of you tuning in on Stranger Things Season 4, Part 2 tomorrow, enjoy. I hope no one dies. The end.
Bye.
Bye.